Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Jackson Crawford. In this short video on my Patreon-supported YouTube channel, I want to talk about the term Midgard, often anglicized as Midgard, the Old Norse term for the realm in which humans live, and its related Tolkien popularized English form, Middle-Earth. Now, it's my understanding that around the world it's fairly commonplace for human societies to view themselves as in the middle on one axis or plane or another relative to realms where the inhuman exists. For example, I know that the Ute, or some Ute in western Colorado, referred to the habitable elevations as Middle Earth, right? So below the elevations where there weren't enough resources, and above elevations where the plains tribes were, right, like the Arapaho and Cheyenne. And in a similar way, the Norse cosmos is so arranged that human beings are said to live in the Midgard. Now, the Gardr part means enclosure, right? It is actually related to the English word yard. But we are in fact enclosed around. We are encircled by, at least in the mythic perspective, actually the eyelash hairs of Ymir, the first living being, which were set up as a fence around the realm where humans live. Now right now I'm actually in a Gardr myself, in a kind of natural Wyoming Stonehenge here, in a specific location that I can't give you directions to, but I thought it was kind of reminiscent of the same thing, right? Because I'm encircled by rock. And of course, I think it's natural that as kids we seek out places like that, right? Like we like these places that are kind of fenced in to keep the prying eyes of the adult world without outside of us a little bit. Now, the picture that gets drawn of the Norse cosmos in so many popular presentations about Norse mythology, right, like books and websites and such. This freaking rock is eroding on me as I speak, literally as I speak. Often presents Midgard, Middle-Earth, as being more of a planet than it really is in the Norse conception. Remember, the Norse don't even talk about planets, probably don't even have the conception of Earth as a planet like Venus or Mars. Instead, it's all one planet, but Midgard, the land, surrounds an interior ocean, which is essentially the Atlantic and Mediterranean, which is one body of water, but without two different labels, surrounded by a ring of land, and that's Midgard. That's the land of Midgard, where we live. And then there's this eyelash fence, and then beyond that there's the outer ocean. That's where Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent that encircles our realm, lives. And then beyond that is Utgardr, outside the Gardr, outside the enclosure, which of course, at least part of which is Jotunheimar, usually referred to in the plural, the homes of the Jotnar, or giants or anti-gods, the enemies of the gods. Now, the gods also live in an enclosure that's Osgardr. Os is the singular form of the same root that you see in Aesir, the plural designation for the family of gods, includes Odin and Thor. Where exactly that is relative to our Midgard is a little bit hard to say. It seems to be higher, but it might not be literally in the sky. It might be on top of a mountaintop or something like that. The way to it seems to be land rather than sky, although one of the ways to it is the Bifrost or Rainbow Bridge. Now, how does this term get used in Old English and other West Germanic languages like Old Saxon on the continent? Let me give you a brief word from my sponsor in the usual way, and then I'll talk about that momentarily. Now, the Old English equivalent to Old Norse Midgardr is Midanjerd. Now, you can tell that Jerd, right, which is spelled with a G, but G in Old English is pronounced ya, and is respelled in modern English as ya, as Y. That is, of course, mid-yard. Now, there is not a pagan connotation to this term in Old English, as people sometimes suppose because of its relationship to the Old Norse term Midgardr. It is rather a pretty normal way of just referring to the earth. It's all over Beowulf. It's all over a lot of Old English poetry, including explicitly Christian poetry. In Beowulf on line 75, we see Yeon Thisna Medenjer, beyond this Midgard. It also shows up in Old Saxon. Now, Old Saxon does not mean the same thing as Anglo-Saxon. Old Saxon is rather the language of the Saxons back on the continent in Europe, so it's more or less the ancestor form of modern Low German dialects. Very closely related to Old English, however. And one of the most fascinating literary remnants of Old Saxon is the poem Helion, or Savior, which is a paraphrase of the life of Christ from the Gospels in the poetic style of, say, Beowulf or Völuspá, with a lot of interesting little changes to make it more culturally understandable by early Saxon converts to Christianity. Anyway, it also uses the term Midgard in Old Saxon Middlegard for earth. So, an Thessan Middelgard Managun to helpun, on this Midgard to help many. So it's used, it's such a general term for earth that it is sort of pissed of its pagan connotations that it might have otherwise for us today. Now, how do we get Middle Earth out of this? Actually, this is in Middle English, where that Old English compound midden-yerd loses the y and winds up as something like midden-erd. Of course, you can also get that same prefix that you see in Old Saxon Middlegard there, so you can wind up with Middle English Middle-erd, probably from, I think, an unattested Old English Middle-yerd there too. But what happens is that once that y is lost, speakers of Middle English reanalyze the second element not as yard, or enclosure, but rather as erd, earth. And so you wind up with, I believe as early as the 1200s in Middle English, but I'm not a big Middle English guy, Middle-earth, which, of course, is used by Tolkien in describing the earth as the setting of his mythical stories. So there's a deep continuity between this term in Old Norse mythology, the term is used in Tolkien, but also with the term that actually became a pretty normal way of talking about earth, terra firma, in Old English, Old Saxon, and probably other Old Germanic languages as well. So, a testament to the pretty normal human proclivity to see ourselves as being in the middle and kind of wanting to be walled off from what's beyond, just as I am right now in the middle of beautiful Wyoming, from which I'm wishing you